I'll do the interstitial.
Oh, okay. I was like, do you want me to sing it? I was like,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Discovery Debrief, a Star Trek podcast. We are now into episode 9, and today we're doing things a little bit differently, because obviously we are in the early days of the lull after the mid-season finale, so there's not a significant amount of stuff that we can talk about in relations to new material for the actual show itself, but we've talked over the last couple of weeks over the idea of maybe diving into this first new novel that has come out, the first step in the expanded universe of Star Trek in the realm of Discovery. So to that end, that means that our regular panel is a little truncated for this episode. It's only me, co-host Chris Clow, and I am joined by Rachael Clow. Rachel?
hi, Chris.
Hi, Rachel. Nice to see you again.
Okay.
I mean... well, we see each other every day. So, but still, obviously, it's just you and me because we're the only ones that read this book on our panel. So it makes sense. It's just me and you that's talking about it, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Well, we listened to it. We didn't read it.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's true because audiobooks are really convenient when you're going to work or you're doing another task. So that's how we decided to absorb it. But so we'll be taking a more in-depth look at Star Trek Discovery Desperate Hours, which was a novel written by author David Mack. But before we actually dive into the book, and it's only us, but you have been watching new episodes of Deep Space, well, old episodes of Deep Space. You've been continuing your Deep Space Nine rewatch.
Yes. I wish I was watching new episodes of Deep Space Nine.
Oh yeah, you and me both. But so how many episodes have you actually absorbed since the last time we recorded?
I don't know, like 5 or 6.
You've watched a lot.
Yeah. Including one of my favorite episodes of the whole series, which is the one where Quark and Nog and Rom go back in time and cause the Roswell incident.
Little Green Men.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is a great one.
Yeah, I love that one.
I love Quark's crack about when he discovers what cigarettes are in the 20th century. Like, if they'll buy poison, they'll buy anything.
Yeah.
And he's got this whole capitalistic scheme hatched to have dominance over the 20th century Earth, which is a pretty funny. But yes, very good episode. So upwards of like 6 episodes then, probably.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of Deep Space Nine. And which season are you in?
4th season.
4th season
Yeah.
still. Okay.
They're good episodes, Chris.
It's true. I'm not bashing Deep Space Nine. I would never do such a thing, but you're enjoying it still. Are you picking anything up on a rewatch that you maybe didn't pick up the first time you watched this show?
Well, I'm finding a lot more parallels to political situation, especially with the episodes where they're all freaked out because there's changelings on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, to me watching it in 2017, it was like, oh yeah, you know, we can't give up all our freedoms because we're afraid of terrorists.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that was the intention in like 1997 or
right.
whenever. But maybe it was. Maybe I was just a child and
weirdly reactionary, even though 9/11 hadn't happened yet.
Yeah. I found it really prescient.
Mm-hmm.
Prescient? How do you pronounce that? I've
prescient?
only ever read that word.
Prophetic. How about?
Okay.
But prescient, I think, is I think that's a good word for it. Well, as for me, I haven't really been doing. The absence of Discovery has kind of gotten me depressed, honestly. No new Star Trek. I mean, I got so used to the idea that there's new Star Trek for us to absorb, and it's something that I haven't.
Now we're spoiled.
Exactly. Like, I haven't been able to look forward to that on television for upwards of 12 years, and now that it's gone, I don't want it to leave again. You know, I knew what those 12 years are like, and I got used to things over the last couple of months, and I can't go back. I can't go back now. Don't make me.
I won't go back.
I don't want to. But, so, as far as absorption of other Star Trek stuff, it's been kind of at a minimum, especially with other things that have been ramping up over the last couple of weeks in regards to popular culture and other media. But Star Trek is always in my heart. So even if I might take a little bit of a backseat, it's never taking a backseat.
I'm sure you've absorbed some of my Deep Space Nine.
Well, yeah, I mean, to a degree. I always pay attention whenever we have Star Trek on our TV, but I haven't gone out of my way to do anything else beyond that. So, other than this.
Okay.
So, why don't we actually dive into our discussion, which is on the novel Star Trek Discovery, Desperate Hours. So for those of you who probably haven't read the book, I mean, we're going to get into some of the details as far as character interactions and some of the loose details of the plot, but we're not going to get into things too specifically. But hopefully this will still be an entertaining discussion, especially considering what this book is going for and what it potentially means for the characters. And obviously, and I mentioned this before, but Star Trek and Star Wars work fundamentally differently when it comes to approaching expanded universe material, because in Star Wars, especially nowadays, everything is in continuity. That's not the case in Star Trek. In Star Trek, everything that is licensed, so anything that is not on the screen, is not technically canon, but when you have a good writer, of which I think David Mack most definitely is, they still try to observe the rules of canon. So if it was going to fit in, then it feels like it can. But so just full disclosure right up front, this book is not in continuity, but it kind of feels like it in some respects. So here's the book jacket description before we actually dive into some of the specifics. So this takes place 1 year before the Vulcan Hello, before the very first episode of the show. And it says, aboard the starship Shenzhou, Lieutenant Michael Burnham, a human woman raised and educated among Vulcans, is promoted to acting first officer. But if she wants to keep the job, she must prove to Captain Philippa Georgiou that she deserves to have it. She gets her chance when the Shenzhou must protect a Federation colony that is under attack by an ancient alien vessel that has surfaced from the deepest fathoms of the planet's dark, uncharted sea. As the menace from this mysterious vessel grows stronger, Starfleet declares the colony expendable in the name of halting the threat. To save thousands of innocent lives, Burnham must infiltrate the alien ship, but to do so she needs to face the truth of her troubled past and seek the aid of a man she has tried to avoid her entire life until now.
Bum, bum, bum.
So, this is the first time that we get to absorb the show's characters outside of the context of the show itself. So, Rachel, why don't we start this off? Let me ask you, did you find the way the show's characters were positioned in this story to be educational?
Yes. Am I allowed to say who the man she has tried to avoid her entire life is?
No, we're going there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're definitely going there.
Because it's Spock. And I guess I found that the Spock-Michael interaction was the most educational.
Mm-hmm.
I also, if we're looking at a broad overview here,
Mm-hmm.
I liked getting to know Captain Pike and his number one, Una,
Mm-hmm.
who I didn't even know her name.
Well, she didn't have a name in the show. Like, in canon specifically, she doesn't have a name outside of number one. So that's the name that they gave her. And I think they gave her that name in previous books as well. But, I mean, they had to give her... They couldn't just call her... Especially since Michael herself is called number one by Captain Georgiou.
Right.
But yeah.
Anyway, yeah. I like that she was given more character and backstory. That was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of an underutilized character overall in Star Trek lore.
Well, I haven't read many other books, so this might be like in the books. This is just her character. For all I know.
True, but yeah. I mean, since Majel Barrett went on to play Nurse Chapel in the original series after it was picked up, and then when she, of course, went on to play Deanna Troy's mother, her position and what she was doing was kind of more devoted to those characters as opposed to seeing more from number one. So we don't really have a lot of canonical perspective on number one. So this book, I totally agree. We got to see some cool stuff. So what do you think you learned the most about Michael specifically when you read this book? Because, as you know, we talked before, when the show was first starting, obviously Michael's a new character, and obviously she's the main character, but we still are in the getting to know you. You know, we're in that phase. we're in the getting to know you phase of things overall. So when you read this book, like by the time you finished it, do you feel like you had a better understanding of who Michael Burnham is?
Yeah, and I think the author did like such a good job fitting in her characterization in the novel with what was revealed in Discovery, to the point where it's all kind of mixed up in my mind, and I'm not sometimes I have trouble unweaving, like, wait, did I learn that in the show, or did I learn that piece of information from the book, like this sort of thing. So there's some like flashbacks in the book that are really illuminating about Michael's early life and kind of really make sense in terms of why she is the way she is in the show. So I was really impressed.
Yeah, and I got that impression too, especially considering, you know, I definitely, you know, I finished this after you did. It was a slower burn with me, but I'm kind of glad that it was, because, well, more specifically, the episode of the show that we watched that directly dealt with her history with Sarek. I'm glad that I had seen that episode before I finished the book, because if I had not, it might have kind of spoiled some aspect of that episode, even though it doesn't directly deal with like plot stuff, but the depth to which the book went to complemented what we learned in that episode, I thought. Really well.
It really did. Yeah.
Well, what about Saru? What did you learn about him in the book that we maybe still haven't learned in the show?
Well, I mentioned it in the main show. He's way less annoying in the book because, like, they have a lot of his inner monologue, right? And his inner monologue is very interesting because he's sort of, like, aware that, like, he's like, oh, I don't fit in because I'm all nervous all the time. And I appreciated that, so I appreciated Saru, and I think I've appreciated him more on the show than other people because I have, like, this idea of maybe who he is inside that I'm sort of projecting onto the character that I see on the show. Yeah, I think Saru's an interesting character from the inside. I guess I relate to him because I'm also very nervous.
Well, it might have made the moment too when the Pavians got rid of his chronic fear. It might have made that a little punchier with our understanding of having read the book, because, you know, we know that the fear pervades every aspect of his thinking, so seeing that taken away from him, someone who reads the book might understand a little bit more how fundamental a shift that is for a character like Saru.
Yeah, maybe.
You know.
Yeah, I obviously I finished the book long before that episode, so I have no frame of reference for how it seemed if you hadn't read the book, but
right.
Yeah,
of course. Well, another character that was prominently featured was Captain Georgiou. And did you get any impressions about her that you may not have gotten from the show itself?
I don't think it added, like, an insane amount of stuff about Captain Georgiou, but it very much complements what you learn from the show and kind of delves into maybe why she's, you know, one of the most decorated captains.
Sure.
Although maybe she's the most decorated, like, posthumously, I don't know.
Well, it's in that episode where Saru tried to, like, Wikipedia, you know,
how to do his job.
Right, yeah. Or Google how to do his, or however it was. She was listed among the most decorated captains, and he asked specifically living or dead. So, because she was in the list with Pike.
I'm wondering if she was decorated before she died, or if she, like, got so many awards for the manner of her death that she became one of the most. Yeah, but in any case, it's not important. It's just a weird semantic thing that I've thought of.
Sure.
In any case, you see why she's such a good captain, because you can see a lot more of, like, her normal every day-to-day leadership skills, and Again, her inner monologue, which is really makes a lot of sense, and she's kind of like a proxy for what we think is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's true. I think she was one of the characters that I attached to more in reading the book because, well, in those first 2 episodes of the show, you do get a very clear idea of the kind of commander she is. And you also get a decent idea at her humanity, and that's what I feel was accentuated in the book. Like, you hear these conversations that she has with Michael that are a little quieter, and, she's still not... It's, in a way, she's still kind of feeling Michael out as far as what role she's going to be able to play on the Shenzhou.
Mm-hmm.
But she also has this intuition that seems to tell her that this is an officer that I need to groom for greater things. And I got more of an impression of that in the book, in addition to seeing the fact that she is an extraordinarily capable commander. And I really liked that aspect of it. I was hoping that she would have a more prominent presence in the show than we got. Obviously, her shadow looms large over the entire show, but actually having another adventure to absorb where she is a character of consequence and someone who's kind of steering the ship to figure out what's going on and to see how she deals with her personnel and even with other captains, which we'll get to in a minute, was something that I really thought was cool for her perspective. So definitely something to behold. So the opening of the book positions the characters for us pretty quickly, and we actually get to see Burnham ascend to, at first, acting first officer. And the show's done a lot over the course of the season's first chapter to emphasize Burnham's relationship with Captain Georgiou, and the book provides a closer look at that. Did you think the book gave more context to the feelings Michael held later about her failure for the captain of the Shenzhou? Did it hit you a little bit harder, let's say in the mid-season finale, when she's trying to do right by the memory of Captain Georgiou against Call because of what you learned in the book?
I would have to... I'm not sure about that. I think that, like, she's already been on the Shenzhou
6 years or something?
Yeah,
upwards?
so I feel like their relationship is kind of... Their relationship's, like, at the same place in the book as it is in the first... At the beginning of Discovery.
Sure.
It's just Michael hasn't ascended to first officer, but they're already, like, good friends.
Right.
And have that, like, really established mentor-mentee kind of relationship going. So
What about the rivalry between Michael and Saru?
I found that pretty illuminating. I think it's not as clear in the show what like, are they rivals? Are they friends? True, yeah. Like you don't quite get that, and in this book they make it pretty clear that they're rivals, which, like, I think I watched the first 2 episodes. I then listened to part of the book where they're rivals. I was like, oh, I guess they don't like each other. And then we watched more of the episodes where Saru's, talking to Michael, and he's saying, like, you're dangerous. And stuff like that. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like, that really fits in with what was in the book. So
yeah, I got that impression too. I mean, the show does just enough to sort of hint at the history between Michael and Saru, but actually seeing them in open competition where, Saru makes... I think that he does more to offer the idea of a conflict between them than Michael does. Like, Saru always feels like he's on the defensive, that he has something to prove. And
I think he's insecure about his abilities because he's a prey species. Right. In case you didn't know.
Yeah, he always makes that pretty clear when you let him talk a little bit longer. But well, that's another thing too. I mean, obviously we'll talk a little bit more about Saru, but so the show itself, and we've talked about this before with Cicero and Zaki, is likely never to feature actual characters from the original series. But of course, one of the actual selling points for the book is the fact that Michael has to team up with Spock in order to get to the bottom of what's happening with the ancient alien juggernaut. I think it's called the Juggernaut. But this is a very consequential meeting in both the context of the show and the wider Star Trek universe. So how do you think that specific dynamic was handled in the story? Obviously, on one hand, we have a character that we all know abundantly well, who's one of the pillars of the Star Trek universe, if not the pillar of the Star Trek universe. And on the other hand, we have the newest lead character for a spin-off series, for all intents and purposes. And they have this intrinsic connection. We still have never seen them, and we likely never will see them on the show interact. So when that interaction began to take shape in the book, how did that make you feel? What did you feel about that?
I felt good about it. I felt like the characterization of Spock was, like, great. Like, it raised no bells of alarm for me of being like, this is weird, or this isn't the Spock that I know. Or
Your
anything.
BS detector didn't go off.
Yeah. That's a good word for it. I really like their interaction. I think it explains some things to me, because I kind of wondered, like, what is their relationship like? Are they friends? And I think that it delves into what their relationship really is about. And so it kind of scratches that itch for me, where I feel like the show doesn't have to address it, because, like, I understand.
And we know a lot about Spock. You could, if you have a decent character understanding of Spock, even without having read this, you can likely infer how that interaction plays out. But actually seeing it, or in this case reading it, or in our case listening to it, I definitely thought it was rewarding. I mean, as someone I've talked about it ad nauseum before, I mean, the original series is my favorite aspect of this franchise. So seeing Spock again, and in a characterization that definitely seems widely informed by all aspects of his life that we know about. So the book even makes reference to Yesteryear, that episode of the animated series where we actually see an aspect of his childhood. But it also seems to ring true with even some aspects of the way Spock explains his own connection to humanity in something like Unification, his appearances in The Next Generation. You know, he's always fighting that turmoil between his warring human and Vulcan halves, something that obviously by the 24th century he has come to terms with and made peace with, but he's still a very young man in this. So that those aspects of his personality are still very much in conflict. And it just seemed to catch all of that. So actually seeing what Spock's childhood is like and how that links up with what we are now learning about Michael's story is fascinating. And it's definitely something that I hope is continued in the show. Even if we never see Spock, I hope that this is an aspect of Michael's character and her own personality and her own history that is given a more robust treatment in future episodes, if that makes sense. But
they can't show Spock.
But they can't show Spock. Of course not.
Maybe they could have his voice come from.
Maybe.
Have a Zachary Quinto sound alike.
Yeah, there you go. Or something like that. I mean, practically speaking, it's if they were going to have Spock on, obviously they recast Sarek.
They could do that creepy face CG.
Oh, and actually like bring Leonard Nimoy back?
Just make Leonard Nimoy be there.
I don't know how I feel about that.
I hate that idea. I'm sorry I thought of it.
just hire Quinto. He'll come back. He would. Well, another character though that I wasn't expecting as far as interactions between Discovery characters and original series characters that I thought was cool was Saru and Commander Una, or Number One.
Yeah.
Like, Saru found a kindred spirit. It's funny because in his own internal monologue, he's kind of making reference to the fact that, well, I would never fall in love with a human, but if I would, this would be the one. He
also says it's like, I'd marry her if she were a Kelpian.
Right, exactly, yeah. if you're a human, that's a non-starter. Sorry, ladies that might be interested in Saru, but
Those threat ganglia.
yeah.
Whoa.
Oh boy. Yeah. But what did you think of how that, especially as someone who was admittedly not very familiar with number one, seeing how they interacted with each other, did that give you a sense of happiness for Saru, or did it make you feel something else?
Yeah, happy for Saru. I think that helped me get to know Saru better. Especially like prior to the episode with the Pavians. You don't really see him like in a situation where he's like doing stuff well or like
right.
Like I don't know. So it was nice to get to know him in the outside of the context of him just being like, I sense death coming. Ah! Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Sure.
Outside of a crisis, I guess. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. A sense of understanding and I guess camaraderie, or maybe kindred, a kindred feeling of, or a kindred intellect, maybe, is what Commander Una seemed to be. Yeah, I thought that was cool. Well, when it comes to Spock and what his presence brings to the table in regards to learning more about Michael, it seems that they both have very complicated feelings that they need to process about Sarek. Did the discussions between Michael and Spock directly give you any more of an indication about where Sarek stands in both of their, I guess, views on things?
I'm confusing all of my knowledge from the book and the show.
Well, no, that's okay though. Like,
do you, what the book added to? I don't know. I guess my overall impression is Sarek, buddy, read some parenting books. There are so many books about parenting. It's just it's like you messed it up in all sorts of unique ways. I don't know.
Yeah, you know, especially in the show, I was kind of getting the impression that Michael might be maybe Sarek's second chance at being a father, because obviously there are some pretty big failings that he endured with Spock specifically. I mean, Spock always seemed to characterize the relationship with his father as a difficult one. You know, like, they never ever really got along. They had moments of understanding between each other, but it always seemed like it was always the peace that would linger before they would again declare war on each other. Like, the first time we meet Sarek, he and Spock aren't speaking and haven't spoken as father and son, at least, in nearly 20 years. And obviously that led to a moment of understanding between each other. And Sarek took an active role, especially after Spock died, in trying to get his son back. But then, by the time we get to the 24th century and unification, some disagreement about an ambassadorial issue led them to not speak to each other again, and Spock left the Federation as a result. It's just like, Michael seems like she has more of a capability of sticking around, I guess, actually valuing Sarek more as a father, but maybe she doesn't feel as affronted as Spock does for some reason.
I don't know, maybe because she's not a Vulcan.
And she's leaning more towards actual love.
I don't know. This is just sort of me headcanoning it, but maybe, like, it's if somebody has like really upset you, and then you might say like, well, it's logical that I don't interact with that person anymore. Or it's not logical for us to have a relationship, but in human society, you're like, well, nah, you know, I love my dad.
Yeah.
so or my dad figure.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, even if he was a jerk to me or lied to me or whatever.
A very Vulcan attitude. If something is causing a problem, then just excise it from your life.
Yeah.
And
so
you can't really do that, or at least most humans can't really do that feasibly without having severe psychological scars, maybe.
Well, I just feel like you can forgive a lot of stuff because you love a person.
Yeah.
So.
And that's the thing,
that's
too.
That's good.
Because Michael is pretty clear about the fact that she does love Sarek, especially in what we've seen in the show. And Sarek and Spock, it's like they independently confirm at separate points that they love each other, but they can't seem to do it to each other, you know?
Right, yeah.
And that's something that would unfortunately seem to persist until both of them die. So...
Oh. You made me sad, Chris.
I'm sorry. But I mean, that's the thing. Like, the show has... by positioning a prequel that features the family of Sarek very prominently, we have an entirely new perspective, or potentially new perspective, on what Sarek's attitudes are. And that, to me, is fascinating. But, so before I actually get to the next question, let me ask you something separate. About The Cage. Because you and I have watched The Cage together a couple of times. How do you see that episode in the wider pantheon of Star Trek?
My thoughts on it were I never quite took it seriously, I guess.
What about the content of the episode?
Well, I think it's a solid episode.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why it wasn't good enough for what the issue the network had with it. Because
I can tell you, it seems
representative of the show as a whole and what it was going to be.
At least from my understanding, is two things. The first complaint that NBC apparently had about it was that it was far too cerebral.
Okay.
For network television. And the second one, remember it's 1964, they couldn't stomach the idea of a woman second in command.
Okay.
So those are the two things. But I mean, obviously things worked out for Star Trek overall.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently it was those two factors. There were some other things too, but those were the two primary factors that led to the show not getting picked up just from that pilot.
Why did they let them make a second pilot?
I guess they were interested enough in the concept that they thought it was worth another try. But I mean, it is very unusual, especially by the standards of today. I mean, you normally just get one shot at it.
Yeah.
I think that Star Trek is actually relatively unique in television history in getting picked up off of the production of a mandated second pilot by a network. But they couldn't get Jeffrey Hunter for the second pilot, which is why they cast William Shatner.
Yeah, I like William Shatner better than Jeffrey
Captain
Hunter.
Pike.
Yeah.
Well, that was so that's where you stand on The Cage, basically. Like, you respect it, you generally like it.
Yeah, I like it, but I think that the success of the rest of the show speaks for itself, right?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
I think that I like William Shatner better, and I like Shatner and Nimoy's interactions are wonderful.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you would have got that.
Sure.
So
apparently, getting back to the book now, apparently it was Discovery co-creator Brian Fuller who asked that the first tie-in novel feature a crossover between the crews of the Shenzhou and the Enterprise as commanded by Captain Christopher Pike. So, now that we've kind of established where you stand on The Cage, what did this book give you in regards to positioning Captain Pike and his first officer? Like, did you learn anything about their characterizations from this book that you maybe didn't get out of The Cage?
I guess I didn't like Captain Pike.
Oh, really? You just outright didn't like him?
Yeah, I kind of
like
found him annoying, or I guess it was just he was so I don't want to spoil anything, which is sort of
right,
why I'm hesitating, but he comes off as being a very like by the book kind of guy, and
no imagination.
Yeah. So
he'll follow an order.
Yeah.
Without really questioning
too much to that to that side of the spectrum, and yeah. So I found him. It's kind of like, shut up, Captain Pike. I liked number 1 / Una a lot. Mostly because I had no context for who her character actually was, and I really liked her interactions with Saru. So,
yeah. What about her interaction? And this is jumping ahead a little bit because it's at the end of the book, but she had a pretty telling interaction with Spock near the end of the book that I was charmed by it. I mean, it was almost like Una was actually trying to be maybe the only person aboard the Enterprise to reach out to Spock when he's clearly troubled by what has just transpired. But I got kind of a Troy-like vibe off of her.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, is she's very empathetic.
Yeah, she's actually trying to, I guess, be inclusive as a first officer, which I thought was kind of cool. But, so, did you dislike Pike after watching The Cage, or is that something that you got pretty much from the book?
From the book. I mean, honestly, I don't really know. Even from The Cage, I don't have, like, a strong characterization of Captain Pike. I mean, he's just sort of like a handsome dude.
Okay, how about some pedantic continuity stuff?
Woo!
Yeah, we all love pedantic continuity stuff, right? Hosted by Chris Clow.
The Clow Continuity Cast.
So before we actually get into it, some context. When David Mack was asked about what it would be like to rationalize the massive differences between what we see of the aesthetic in Star Trek Discovery and the established continuity differences in the original series, in Cage specifically, he said that the book, quote, addressed the difference in the ship's aesthetics to a human tendency to want to redesign even the simplest things every few years. He also explained the differences in technology by saying, quote, I posited that the use of subspace holograms had fallen out of favor by the time the Enterprise was built because the holograms were bandwidth hogs on subspace channels and prone to encryption flaws. And while the interfaces on the Shenzhou's bridge look fancier, the characters who serve on the Enterprise feel proud that their ship is so advanced that it doesn't need all these gadgets to get the job done. And regarding the uniforms, which is something that Cicero always brings up when we make these comparisons, he said, quote, the crews of the Enterprise and other Constitution-class ships are considered elite units, so they've been issued special diplomatic uniforms to designate their status.
Okay.
So, obviously, there's quite a bit of contrivance there.
What's the point of a uniform if they're different?
They're not uniform?
Yeah, uniform.
A duoform?
I do not buy the uniforms. I do buy the not using the holograms because, look, I could FaceTime... Well, I guess I don't have an iPhone, so I can't FaceTime anybody, but I could Skype people if I wanted to all the time. I don't Skype anybody because, like, I don't want to have to, like, make sure I look good every time I talk to somebody on the phone. Mm-hmm. Like, no, nobody wants...
Well, it's also easier, faster, and maybe even more efficient to just send someone a text, usually, you know?
Well, yeah, but if you need to have a conversation, a phone conversation is usually fine.
Right? It will suffice.
Yeah, or it's even preferable. Like I said, I don't want to have to, like, do my makeup every time I want to talk on the phone.
Neither do I.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know how much makeup I put on every day.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Like my weight in makeup. So the rationale then given in the book between the striking design differences of the Shenzhou and the Cage era Enterprise, you didn't really buy it?
No. Like, if it's fine, that's fine, but
yeah.
Like,
so
no, the thing is, you wanted it to look like 2017. You made it look like 2017. It's fine. I'm cool with it. Rationalize it however you want, but...
So if we see, if on Discovery, we do end up seeing, as we kind of speculated a couple of episodes ago, if we do end up seeing a Constitution-class ship at some point, would this explanation not fly, or do you think it's going to fall within the capabilities and the aesthetic that the show's already established?
I mean, costume designers are good at their jobs, right? I'm sure they can, like, make those, like, costumes look, you know...
Close enough?
Yeah, like halfway between or something like that. Mm-hmm. They don't have to if they don't want to.
Right.
I don't care.
The only thing... well, the only thing on the show itself that kind of gives service to what Mac said about the Enterprise being like the pinnacle, like elite units.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw that conversation between Burnham and Tilly where they both were talking about, if you want to go somewhere, get on a Constitution-class ship.
Yeah.
right? Like that's somewhere that clearly most of the fleet wants to try and get to. But yeah, as far as the mechanics of how the design differences would work, it works in prose. It doesn't. I don't think it would work on the show.
Wasn't like Brett Anderson on a Constitution class ship in the pilot?
I don't think so. I
don't know what class his ship was.
It
was a big ship.
It was a big ship, but I'm reasonably sure that it wasn't. If it were, I'd have freaked out probably. So because I didn't freak out, I'm reasonably sure that it wasn't. Like that's how confident I am in my freak out fandom, that I'm reasonably sure.
Hope you're not wrong.
I'm reasonably sure I'm not wrong. We'll consult Memory Alpha when we're done. But well, Captain Georgiou, the other relationship, as far as, established Discovery characters and original series characters, that was the one that I probably attached to the most, was the sort of conflict, I guess, between Captains Georgiou and Pike. I was really intrigued by that, because she is very clearly positioned as the more seasoned and perhaps even more decorated and revered command officer when compared directly with Captain Pike. So how did you feel about the way that they interacted with each other and how they worked together? Because it seems like they had pretty different command philosophies, as we alluded to before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I liked it. I think those interactions sort of made they settled my feelings about, like, Georgiou is, like, who I would want to be if I was a commander, and Captain Pike is kind of a military...
You think he's too bullish, maybe?
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, he just feels very, like, military to me. I don't know.
And she feels more explorer?
Yeah. She feels more like a leader. And he's like a commander.
Well,
right?
And this might dance around a spoiler a little bit here, but there's one very clear scenario in the book where, and it's alluded to in the jacket synopsis that I read at the top of the show, but there's a moral choice that needs to be made in regards to the colony that's put at risk, and it's an existential one. Like Starfleet Command makes pretty clear that this alien juggernaut needs to be destroyed, colony be damned, and Pike is the one who's willing to sacrifice the colony. He doesn't like it, but he's willing to do it, and Georgiou isn't willing to do it at all, and that's part of where the conflict comes from. So you didn't find necessarily Captain Pike's rationale for following orders to be satisfactory.
Yeah, no, I felt like Georgiou was willing to do it if she had to do it, but she was more like, that is the last thing that we will have to do. And she was more like willing to seek out all of the options and weigh this as a choice that has to be made.
Whereas Pike wanted to destroy things almost from the outset.
Yeah, no, I feel like he was just like, I have my orders, I'm gonna do my orders, and he wasn't as interested in, like, we're gonna sit down and think about what we're doing.
That's one thing that I think I maybe didn't like about the book, is that it seemed like it almost came to active combat between the Shenzhou and the Enterprise more than I think it would have. Like conceivably, and the book even makes reference to the fact that in a situation where you have two officers of equal rank, where you have two captains, Georgiou is the senior captain. Like, she's the one whose orders need to be followed in the chain of command in that scenario. But Pike was so singularly focused that I was a little put off by, wait a second, you guys are really willing to lock your weapons on each other and escalate this to an armed conflict?
He was mansplaining Starfleet to her.
Well, but
I don't know if that's the real...
No, but that was
a good use of that term.
No, you're right, though. Maybe that's not where it was coming from for him, but that's kind of what he was doing, and it was Georgiou that kind of slapped him back down.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I thought that the conflict escalated between two members of the same fleet a little too quickly.
I mean, look, I know that there's supposed to be like an enlightened future, but to me, I totally buy that if you're a woman who is good at your job, that a less experienced, less capable man is gonna, like, not take you seriously.
Right.
That's a thing that happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So
it struck you as pretty...
maybe that's why I didn't like Captain Pike. Maybe I'm projecting all of my anger at like gender inequality on Captain Pike. I'm sorry, Captain Pike.
Well, I mean, he makes clear though that he does revere her, but that's not going to stop him from destroying an entire colony of people. But, one of my absolute favorite moments in the book, they get into conflict with the regional government of the colony. And, there's some things that I don't want to get into specifically in regards to how the regional government on the colony works, because that's the source of a pretty interesting conflict in the book, and you should definitely read it for it. But once there's something that presents an opportunity for them to get on the same page, they do pretty quickly. And Captain Pike is more than willing to let Captain Georgiou have the floor and explain to the colony exactly what's happening and why it's happening. And I liked that.
Yeah.
But how about this? What did you actively dislike about this book?
What did you dislike? Give me some time to think about it.
I guess that it seemed like there were some elements of solving the problem that were prolonged more than they needed to be.
I would agree with that.
It took everybody quite a while to actually figure out how a problem is going to be solved. And, I mean, it's understandable, but there were some parts of that element of the experience that I found to be just prolonged.
Right. Okay. I think sometimes I didn't quite understand where the people on the planet were coming from with their antagonism towards Starfleet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was just me being like, Starfleet is good. Come on now.
Like, we know that it's an organization that's going to try and help the people within its purview.
Yeah. And other than that, I liked this book.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a good time listening to it.
Would recommend.
Yeah, I would recommend.
If you had to give it a grade, what would you give it? Like, if you were rating this on maybe you did rate it on Goodreads.
I did rate it on Goodreads. I think I gave it 4 stars.
Out of 5?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, there's, I don't know what it could have done to get to that 5 stars, but for me on Goodreads, 5 stars is
transcendental.
It's very rare. Like, that's like, I'd give that to, like, I think this is the best book that came out this year or something.
Sure. What have you given 5 stars?
Homegoing by Yagyasi.
Mm-hmm.
That is a really, really good, amazing book. And this fantasy book by N.K. Jemisin. I'm mixing up all the ones in this series. I think it was... the most recent one in the series to come out is The Stone Sky, but this was the first one in that series that I read. And it is a really... Like, I read it in, like, a day or something.
Oh, wow.
Which is... Yeah, like, I paid money for it on Kindle, and then it was just over with because it was so good.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like, I give 5 stars to books that I just absolutely love and I think are, like, the best in their genre of that I've read. So this
one is pretty decent then, you think?
4 stars, yeah. Like, 4 stars is if I enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
3 stars if, I kind of enjoyed it. And then I don't think I've ever given anything 2 or 1 star because I don't finish books.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you've only ever really read one other Star Trek book, right?
Yeah.
Star Trek Enterprise, The Good That Men Do.
And the autobiography.
The autobiography of James T. Kirk, right. And those, how does this one rank in comparison with those?
I like this one better than those.
Really? Better than both of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it had more new information than the autobiography of James Kirk for me.
Sure. Yeah, that's understandable. As for me, I mean, I would probably rate it similarly. I have read a fair amount of Star Trek novels. My favorite, I really enjoyed the Judith Garfield Reeve Stevens, Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens books that were quote unquote co-written with William Shatner that brought Kirk into the 24th century. I thought those were pretty solid. I mentioned the Tales of the Dominion War anthology book, of which David Mack wrote one of the stories for. That's also a go-to of mine. I've read the first entry in the Titan series with Captain Riker, and I enjoyed that one. But this one, I think I felt more immediately invested in because it is tied to a show that I'm very engaged in. Like, if this were not connected to the show, I'm not sure if I would like it as much as I did. But the character work is very solid, so I definitely appreciated it, and I look forward to the next one. So, in the end, how do you think this book informs your perspective on the show and its characters? I mean, you mentioned before that the book gave you greater context to Saru specifically. So, if you had to talk to someone who is watching the show, do you think it's essential reading for someone who wants to understand more about Burnham, Saru, and Georgiou, or would you say it's not particularly important but a nice to read?
I would give it a nice to read.
Mm-hmm.
I think the show does a great job of all of its characterizations,
right?
And they give you the information you need to know if you want to know more. This is an enjoyable diversion.
Sure.
So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so we already talked a little bit about the fact that there's a new Discovery tie-in novel coming out in February called Drastic Measures from author Dayton Ward, and how it'll be dealing with Kodos the Executioner, and that one will have a young Lieutenant Commander Gabriel Lorca and a Commander Georgiou. What do you think you'd want from that book? Because we've watched The Conscience of the King a few times, the episode with Kodos the Executioner. Obviously, that was kind of a cornerstone of the autobiography of James T. Kirk. It was a pretty important occurrence in his early life. So do you have any ideas of what you want to see going into a book that deals with that? Especially considering that this is the first time, conceivably, that we're going to be given a more in-depth look at the early life of the enigmatic Gabriel Lorca.
Yeah, I'm here for that. I want to see young James Kirk mentioned.
Okay.
Alright, I want him to appear in the book. I want to know more about Gabriel Lorca's backstory, because I just want to know, like, what is going on with that dude.
Yeah. Do you think he's going to be just as sure of himself as he is now?
I don't know. That's the thing, is, like, did something happen to him that, like, made him how he is, or is that just how
he's always been?
Yeah, maybe he's gonna be, like, super sketchy and, like, sleeping his way to the top, and...
Well, I wonder if it's gonna silo off the stories between Georgiou and Lorca, or if they're actually going to actively interact with each other. Because it doesn't seem... If I were to guess, I don't think they would get along very well.
Yeah, that doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, they're pretty different. But either way, you're looking forward to the next book.
Yes, I am.
Okay, very good. Well, what are your final thoughts on Star Trek Discovery Desperate Hours?
It's an enjoyable book. Like I said, if you want to know more about the characters, you will find out more about the characters.
Mm-hmm.
It's not long.
That's true. Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, it's a nice, easy read, and I would recommend it.
Sure. And I echo those sentiments largely. I mean, considering, especially now, like, if you are actively grabbing at your veins, wanting more Discovery stuff, like I am, especially now that I've read this book and I don't have anything to look forward to until January, consider picking it up.
Nothing to look forward to.
Well, okay. There's, I mean, as far as
there
Star
are no
Trek,
holidays
no,
in between now and January.
There's no birthday of mine coming up soon or anything like. Well, no, I mean, just in regards to Star Trek, you know, if you want new Star Trek material, and specifically if you want to absorb new material within the realm of Discovery, then Desperate Hours is most definitely worth your time and your attention. And we'd be very interested to know if you did read it. You know, let us know what you think about it. Maybe you have read it, and in that event, we'd love to know what you think about it. But I think that's going to do it for us. So episode 9 of Discovery Debrief is now in the bag. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you did, please like and follow us on our social media channels. And if you'd be so kind, we'd also appreciate it if you wrote a review for the show on iTunes or Facebook. It only takes a minute, and we'll be happy to read your review on the air when it is posted. If you have any questions, you can follow the show on Twitter at DSC Debrief, where you can also find all of our individual Twitter handles. And feel free to send us questions through Twitter, our Facebook like page, or by emailing us at hailingfrequencies@discoverydebrief.com. Please be sure to set your courses for this feed for future episodes. We plan on being back next week with our regular panel to discuss the entirety of the show's first chapter, and potentially with a special guest panelist, so keep on the lookout for that. So stick with us then, and we'll plan to come to you periodically over the next few months with other Star Trek discussions to try and help scratch the itch that this mid-season finale most certainly created. That's going to do it for us, though. So for Rachel, I am Chris. As always, until we speak to you next time, go boldly, my friends.